They had her tied to a post in the middle of the street, and what happened next would change everything for every soul in Caldera Springs. Not one soul in that town moved to stop it. What none of those men knew was that the drifter watching from the shadow of the livery stable was the most dangerous gunslinger in the New Mexico territory. Stay with me, friend, because by the time this story ends, you will understand exactly what kind of man walks quiet and draws first. Her name was Esperanza Vidal. Folks who knew her called her Para, and the ones who loved her called her that soft, the way you say the name of something you were afraid to lose. It was the autumn of 1884 in the New Mexico territory, a season that smelled like dry cedar and coming trouble. And Para Vidal had already lost more than most people are given to begin with. She had lost her father's land. She had lost her father. And now, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, she was losing what little dignity the town of Caldera Springs had left her. This is that story. Stay with me to the very end, partner, because what happens in that town deserves to be remembered. If you are new here, go ahead and subscribe right now, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. What time is it where you are? Pour yourself something warm. This one earns it. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to Caldera Springs, New Mexico territory, autumn of 1884. The town sat in a high desert bowl ringed by red rock mesas, the kind of place the wind never quite left. A single creek ran down from the foothills above it, and that creek was why everything there was worth having, and why everyone worth fearing had come to fight for it. The creek was called Caldera Run. Folks had built their lives around it the way people do around any water source in that country, which is to say, carefully and with a great deal of prayer. By the autumn of 1884, the creek no longer belonged to the people who had prayed over it. It belonged to one man, Augustus Thane. Thane was a land and water baron of the type that the New Mexico territory was producing in quantity during those years. He had come in from Denver, with lawyers and survey maps, and a smile that was always a fraction too wide for the occasion. He had bought the upstream parcel, rerouted the irrigation ditch, and within 2 years had turned the legal machinery of the territory into a tool he owned as surely as he owned his horse. He was not the kind of man who lifted his fists. He had men who did that for him. Chief among those men was a creature named Dolan Reyes. Reyes was Thane's enforcer, a former lawman from El Paso who had lost his badge under circumstances nobody in Caldera Springs had ever gotten the full story on, and who had replaced the comfort of lawful authority with the simpler pleasure of unchecked power. He had 2 main deputies, brothers named Corbin and Fen Galt. Corbin was wide and slow-moving, built like a wagon axle, and had a habit of cracking his knuckles before he hit someone. Fen was narrow and quick-eyed, and did his cruelty with a knife rather than his hands. Between the 3 of them, they maintained what passed for order in Caldera Springs, which was to say that nothing happened in that town without Augustus Thane's permission, and that permission generally came with a price attached. Esperanza Vidal had refused to pay that price. That was the beginning of everything. Her father, Rodrigo Vidal, had homesteaded a piece of ground southeast of the creek before Thane arrived, 40 acres of decent grassland with a small adobe house and a half-built barn. He had raised cattle, modest numbers, but enough, and he had raised Para alongside them after her mother died of fever when Para was 9 years old. Rodrigo had been a quiet, hard-working man who believed in the law the way some men believe in God, with sincere conviction and very little evidence that it was actually working in his favor. When Thane's survey maps put Rodrigo's east fence line on the wrong side of the property boundary, Rodrigo had hired a lawyer in Santa Fe. The lawyer had taken his money and done approximately nothing. When the county land office had reclassified his grazing rights, Rodrigo had made the 2-day ride to the county seat and filed a formal objection. The objection had been received and misfiled. When Dolan Reyes and the Galt brothers had ridden out on a Wednesday evening and cut Rodrigo's fence line and run his herd onto Thane's land, Rodrigo had gone to Sheriff Aldous Pemrick Sheriff Pemrick had listened to all of it with a face that carried the expression of a man listening to something he has decided in advance not to act upon. He had told Rodrigo he would look into the matter. He had not looked into the matter. 2 months after that, Rodrigo Vidal was dead. The official account was a riding accident. His horse had spooked crossing a dry wash, and he had been thrown and struck his head. Dolan Reyes had been in the area that afternoon. Nobody in Caldera Springs said that out loud. Not where anyone who mattered could hear them. Para had buried her father on the hill behind the adobe house, the piece of land she still technically owned and could not quite yet be forced off of by legal means. She was 22 years old. She had a rifle, $60 in a coffee tin, 14 head of cattle she could barely feed, and no one in Caldera Springs willing to stand beside her. That was how things stood on the Tuesday morning in October of 1884, when Dolan Reyes and the Galt brothers rode into town to collect what Thane had decided was his. Para had come into Caldera Springs that morning for flour and a box of .44 cartridges. She was standing outside the mercantile, her list in one hand and her horse's reins in the other, when Reyes and the Galts rode up. Reyes stepped down from his horse with that particular kind of deliberateness that bullies use when they want to establish that they are not in any hurry. He was a tall man with a red dust mustache and eyes that calculated everything they rested on. "Miss Vidal," he said like he was greeting a friend. Para said nothing. "Mr. Thane asked me to remind you that the note he holds on your property comes due 1st of next month," Reyes said. "Since your daddy died owing him for surveying costs and legal fees, that obligation passed to you. It comes to $240. Para's jaw tightened. She knew what the note was. She also knew what it wasn't. It wasn't a legal debt. It was an invented one, the kind Augustus Thane specialized in generating out of paperwork that looked official until you read it carefully, and that by the time you read it carefully, you were usually standing in front of a judge, Thane owned. "That note is not valid," Para said, "and you know it." Reyes smiled at the Galts. Corbin cracked his knuckles. "The county land office says different," Reyes said, "and the county land office is official. Now, we can do this the comfortable way, which is you ride back out to that place and start loading what's yours to take, and we let you keep the cattle. Or we can do it the other way." "The other way," Para said, "is going to cost you more than you expect." That was when Corbin Galt stepped forward and took her horse's reins out of her hand, and Fen Galt took the list she was holding and let it drop into the dust, and Reyes said, loud enough for the street to hear it, "Lady is confused about who owns what in this town. Maybe she needs some time to think on it." He nodded, and Corbin grabbed her by the arm and walked her 10 paces to the post in front of the livery stable, and tied her wrist to it with a rope he produced from his coat. Like he had done this before, which Para thought he probably had. The street watched. Horses stood where they stood. A man in front of the barber shop developed a sudden interest in his boots. The woman sweeping the porch of the hotel went inside and drew her curtain. Para did not scream. She was not the screaming kind. She stood with her wrists tied and her chin up, and she looked at the street and let it see what was happening to her, because she understood that fear depended on being hidden, and she was not going to cooperate with that. It was then that the shot rang out, not aimed at anyone, not close to anyone. It hit the dirt at Corbin Galt's feet and threw up a small puff of red dust, and the sound of it rolled back off the mesa walls and came around again like an echo finding its way home. Everyone looked. A man stood at the far end of the street in the shadow of the livery stable's open door. He was not a big man, not in the way that draws attention before a person knows what they are looking at. Medium height, trail-worn coat the color of drought, hat pulled low, one hand still holding the Colt he had just fired. He had not moved toward them. He was simply there, the way something becomes present when it has decided it is done waiting. "Cut her loose," he said. The voice was quiet. That was the first strange thing about it. Quiet the way a body of water is quiet just before something surfaces. Dolan Reyes turned to look at this man with the full expression of someone who has been interrupted during something important, and expects the interruption to end very soon. Partner, Reyes said, with that smile of his, you just bought yourself a considerable amount of trouble. Cut her loose, the man said again. I won't say it a third time. Reyes looked at Corbin. Corbin looked at his knife. There was a moment, just a beat of held breath, when the whole street felt what was about to happen before anyone's body had moved to make it happen. Then the man shot the rope, not the post, not the air nearby, not a warning ricochet. He shot the rope. The frayed ends fell away and Para pulled her wrists free. And the sound of that second shot was still moving through the mountain air when everyone on the street understood that this particular drifter was not someone they had heard of. Reyes kept his smile, but something behind his eyes had recalculated. You got a name, stranger? Wade, the man said. Just Wade. That's enough name for the business we're doing. This ain't your business. Your business was your own, Wade said, until you made it hers. Now it's mine too. He holstered the Colt with a motion so practiced it was almost invisible, and he walked forward from the stable's shadow into the dust of the street. Para noticed later that he never took his eyes entirely off Reyes and both Galts at the same time. He had a way of arranging himself so that all three of them were in a narrow arc in front of him. Corbin Galt was calculating. You could see the arithmetic working behind his flat eyes. 3 of them. 1 of him. Those were odds that had worked before for Corbin Galt. There are 3 of us, Corbin said. I know, Wade said. That's why I cut the rope first, so she could move if I needed her to move. He looked at Para when he said it, not at Reyes. At her, Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh. You know who you're pulling iron on, stranger? We ride for Augustus Thane. I've heard the name, Wade said. Haven't been impressed. The silence after that was long. Reyes was a man who depended on other men's fear, and whatever else this drifter was, he was not afraid. You could see Reyes sorting through the alternatives, and the alternatives, when he sorted through them honestly, were not in his favor. This conversation isn't over, Reyes said finally. No, Wade agreed. It isn't. Reyes jerked his head at the Galts, and the 3 of them mounted up and rode out of town at a pace designed to look unhurried, which only someone already knowing what pace they should be riding would have noticed was somewhat faster than that. Para was standing in the street rubbing her wrists when Wade walked up to her. You all right? He asked. I've been worse, she said. She looked at him without any particular softness. She had not yet decided what this man was, and Para Vidal was not in the habit of deciding too quickly. Who are you? Just a man passing through. Men passing through don't generally shoot ropes. Don't generally see ropes that need shooting, he said. She looked at him a moment longer. You're going to need somewhere to sleep, she said. I have a barn. It's not comfortable, but it's yours if you want it, and the horses get water from a creek that doesn't belong to Augustus Thane. Yet. Wade looked at the road Reyes had ridden down, and then back at her. I'll take it, he said. The Vidal place was 4 miles out of town, southeast along a dry wash that had cottonwoods growing on it, where the water table came close to the surface. Para rode and Wade walked alongside. He said almost nothing on that road. She said enough for both of them. Not chattering, but giving him information in that measured way, of someone who has been alone too long, and has sorted out which things matter enough to say. She told him about her father. She told him about the note Thane claimed to hold. She told him about the county land office and the lawyer in Santa Fe, and the deed she kept folded inside her mother's Bible, because she did not trust the county clerk's office to hold it for her. Wade listened. He had the listening of a man who does not interrupt, because he is actually tracking everything being said. How many men does Thane keep? He asked when she had gotten to the end of the telling. Reyes and the Galts, and 4 others I've seen. Maybe more he keeps at the ranch house. Sheriff. Para made a sound. Pemrick. He'll do whatever Thane tells him. That's useful to know. She glanced over at him. You're thinking like someone who does something about things, she said. not like a man passing through. I'm passing through, he said, but I don't leave things half-finished on the way. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, which was something Para had not had since before her father died, and she did not examine it too closely, because she was afraid that examining it would make it stop. The adobe house was low and square and solid, built for a country that could be brutal without warning. The barn was rougher, only half the roof planked in, but the stalls were sound, and the trough was full of good water. Wade watered his horse, a compact gray that was unremarkable in every way, except that it stood quietly and watched everything the way its rider did. That first evening, Para made beans and biscuits, and they ate at the table inside the house, and she pulled out her mother's Bible and showed him the deed. He read it slowly and carefully. "This is legal," he said. "I know it's legal," she said. "So does Thane. That's why he's going through the note. Can he make the note stick? With Pembroke as sheriff and the county clerk in his pocket, he can make it stick long enough to take the land. By the time you prove the note fraudulent at a court somewhere, you won't have anywhere to live while you prove it." She already knew this. It was different, hearing it said plainly by someone who had taken it in and thought it through without flinching. "So what do I do?" she asked. "We," he corrected. She looked at him. "You just rode in today," she said. "Yes," he said, "and I'm still here. Before I go any further, partner, I want to stop for just a moment and ask you something. If you have been watching this channel for a while and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that right now. It costs you nothing and it means everything to a small channel like this one. And drop a comment down below. I want to know where you are listening from tonight. What time is it where you are? Are you on a night shift somewhere? Or sitting in your kitchen with a cup of coffee? Tell me. I read every single one. All right, now let us get back to Caldera Springs, because things are about to get considerably worse before they get better. Reyes came back 2 days later, not with Corbin and Fenn this time. He came with a man named Pruitt, who was Thane's lawyer, a compact, dry-looking man in a brown suit who carried a document case the way a rattlesnake carries its venom, completely prepared to use it at any time. Pruitt showed Para the note. He showed her the county land office certification. He showed her a circuit court filing that had been submitted in her father's name 8 months before his death, which she had never heard of and which Rodrigo had clearly never signed, which was a fraud so clean and cold it was almost impressive. Wade stood in the doorway while Pruitt explained all of this. He did not say anything. He read every document Pruitt showed Para with his eyes moving slowly and steadily, and when Pruitt was done, he held out his hand, and Pruitt gave them over with the confusion of a man who has been outwitted by a social reflex before he understood what was happening. Wade examined the filing closely. He turned to the last page and pointed to a line of text below the signature. "This was notarized in El Paso," he said. "That's correct," Pruitt said. "Rodrigo Vidal died in October. This filing is dated September 14th, and the notary stamp is from a notary office in El Paso that closed in February of that year." Pruitt's face did not change, exactly, but something behind it made a small adjustment. "I'd have to verify the dates," Pruitt said. "You know the dates," Wade said. He handed the papers back. "Tell Thane the note is fraudulent and provably so. He can pursue it in court if he wants. By the time he does, those dates will be in front of a territorial judge." "Mr. Thane is a patient man," Pruitt said. "He's going to need to be," Wade said. Pruitt left. Para stood in her kitchen looking at the place where he had been standing, and breathing in a slow, careful way. "You know notary offices in El Paso?" she said. "I've been through El Paso a time or two. That was a gamble." "Not much of one," he said. "A man who forges a filing date doesn't verify his stamp source. He's too sure of himself to bother." She looked at him a long moment. "Who are you really?" He got himself a cup of water from the pitcher and drank it and set the cup back down. Somebody who knows how men like Thane operate, he said. That's enough for now. She let it rest there. She was learning to read the places where he stopped, and she could see that this particular stop had some history behind it, and that the history was not something he was going to lay out over a cup of water at a kitchen table. In the days that followed, Wade did not leave. He had not said he would stay, and she had not asked him to. And somehow, both of them had arrived at the arrangement through that wordless negotiation that sometimes happens between people who are both too practical to spend words on things that are already settled. He worked. He planked the rest of the barn roof. He restrung the fence line Reyes and the Galts had cut, working methodically from the east boundary post inward, using wire Para had in the barn that her father had never gotten to. He repaired the well housing. He said almost nothing while he worked, but the work itself spoke with the authority of someone who had learned a great many things and kept all of them. On the fourth evening, Para brought him coffee at the fence line where he was working, and they sat on the fence rail in the last light, the mesas going dark red, and then dark brown, and then simply dark. And he asked her something he had been circling around since he arrived. "Did you ever shoot a man?" he asked. "No," she said. "Could you?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things. If he was threatening me, or someone I cared about, yes. He nodded. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I want to show you something." The something was a lesson in shooting, not the standing in a field at a can kind of lesson, but the practical kind. Where to stand, how to breathe, how to account for the sun being in your eyes or the ground being uneven. He had her shoot from behind cover. He had her shoot moving. He had her reload in the dark by feel. Because, he said, the situations where you need to reload very fast are the situations where there is not a great deal of light. Para was a good learner. She already knew the basics from her father, but she could see the difference between what her father had taught her and what Wade was teaching her. Her father had taught her to hit a target. Wade was teaching her to survive. "You're very specific about this," she said during a pause in the lesson. "Specifics are what keep you alive," he said. "Where did you learn it?" He was quiet a moment, watching the target he had set up at 40 yards, a tin plate hanging from a cottonwood branch. "Long time ago," he said. "In a different life. The one you're passing through from?" He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the shadow of one. "Something like that," he said. She knew better than to push it. But she filed it away with the other things she was filing, and the collection was beginning to take on a shape. That shape became clearer on the 6th day. Word had gotten around Caldera Springs that there was a drifter staying at the Vidal place who had pulled iron on Dolan Reyes, and Reyes had ridden away. This information traveled through the town the way all genuinely startling information travels, quickly and in whispers, with each repetition shaving the story down to its essentials. A man named Elias Pugh ran the hardware store. He was 60 years old and walked with a cane, and had lived in Caldera Springs since before it had a proper name, when it was just a collection of 3 adobe buildings around a water source. He had watched every piece of what had happened to Rodrigo Vidal, with the expression of a man who knows he is watching a thing he should not be watching and cannot figure out how to look away. Elias Pugh rode out to the Vidal place on a Saturday morning and asked for Wade. Wade came out of the barn and they talked for a long time at the fence line, and Para watched through the window without being able to hear them. When Elias Pugh had gone, Wade came inside and sat down at the table. "You know a man named Pugh?" he asked. "Since I was small," she said. "He was a friend of my father's. He says there are 4 other families in similar positions to yours. Thane has similar notes on 2 of them. The other 2 he hasn't gotten to yet, but expects to be next." "I know," Para said. "The Castellano family, the Moroas, the Hadleys. Thane wants all the creek-adjacent land. Pugh says Thane is accelerating the timeline. He's applied for a territorial water rights certification, that if it goes through, will make all the current informal agreements legally moot. He needs the land settled in his name before the certification comes through. When does the certification come through? 60 days, Wade said. Maybe fewer. They looked at each other across the table. Then we don't have 60 days, Para said. No, he agreed. The escalation came from Thane's end before they had time to plan around it. It came on a Wednesday night, 3 days after Elias Pugh's visit, and it came at Pugh's own place. Pugh's barn burned to the ground in the night. Nobody was hurt, and Pugh himself had gotten his horses out in time, and the house was far enough from the barn that it did not catch. But the barn was gone, and with it 2 years of stored hay and a good portion of Pugh's tools, and a spare wagon. A note had been left on his porch. It said, "Settle up or burn down." It was not signed. Para heard about it the next morning from the Castellano boy, who rode over before breakfast. She was pulling on her jacket when Wade appeared at the kitchen door. "You heard," he said. Just now he was quiet a moment, looking past her at something she couldn't see. "It changes things," he said. "Does it change what you're going to do?" "No," he said. "But it changes the timetable." He rode into town that morning. Alone. Para had wanted to come, and he had asked her not to, and she had seen something in his face when he said it that made her let it go without argument. He had that look sometimes, a contained, measuring look, like a man consulting some internal reckoning that only he could see the numbers of. He found Sheriff Pemrick at the jail, which was a one-room adobe with iron bars on the single window, and an air of general disuse about the legal function it was supposed to serve. Pemrick was a thick-set man of 50, with gray sideburns and the careful eyes of someone who has learned to make calculations about what he can and cannot ignore. He looked at Wade with those careful eyes when Wade came through the door. "Heard you've been staying out at the Vidal place," Pemrick said. "That's right," Wade said. He sat down across from Pemrick's desk without being invited. "Elias Pugh's barn burned down last night." "Tragic," Pemrick said, and his voice gave the word exactly none of the weight the situation deserved. "You have a theory about who burned it." "Accidents happen in dry country," Pemrick said. The note on his porch wasn't an accident. Pemrick was quiet a moment. "I haven't seen any note," he said. "I imagine that's a deliberate kind of blindness," Wade said. "The kind that's more comfortable than the alternative." Pemrick's careful eyes got a degree or two less careful. "Mister, I don't know you, but I know what you're suggesting, and I don't appreciate it. Augustus Thane burned Elias Pugh's barn," Wade said. He did not raise his voice. He said it the way you state something that is true and does not require emphasis to remain true. "You know it. I know it. Most of this town knows it. I am asking you, officially, as the law in this county, to open an investigation. Into what evidence? The note, the timing, Pugh's account of what he saw. Pugh's an old man. His memory isn't reliable. His memory was reliable enough to get his horses out before the barn went," Wade said. Pemrick stared at him. "I'll look into it," he said in the voice of a man who will not. Wade stood up. He was very still when he was standing, the way certain kinds of men are still, not because they are relaxed, but because they have decided that movement is currently unnecessary. "One other thing," he said. "If anything happens to Para Vidal or to any of the other families Thane has been pressuring, I'm going to hold you personally accountable. Not legally. Personally." Pemrick's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" "It's a description of how things are," Wade said. "You might find it useful." He walked out and left the door open behind him, and Pemrick sat alone in his jail with the dry desert wind coming through it. That evening, back at the Vidal place, Wade told Para what had been said. She listened without interrupting. "Pemrick won't do anything," she said. "No," he agreed. "But he knows someone is watching. That's worth something. What happens when Thane decides watching isn't enough to stop him? Then we need to be ready for what comes next, he said, and we need the other families in on it. The next 2 weeks were the ones that mattered most. Wade rode out to the Castellano place and the Moreau place and the Hadley claim. He did not promise them anything that he could not deliver. He told them what he believed was coming, which was that Thane would move before the water rights certification, and that when he moved, he would move fast and with enough force to make a legal response impossible before it was over. He told them that the only answer to that was to be prepared to make it expensive enough that Thane would recalculate. The Castellano brothers, Diego and Ramon, were practical men who had been preparing for exactly this in their own way. They had rifles and knew how to use them. The Morels, a French trapper and his wife and 2 grown sons, were more reluctant, but when Wade explained the water rights timeline, they understood that reluctance had a price of its own. The Hadley family was a widow named Cora Hadley and her 16-year-old son, and Cora Hadley had her late husband's shotgun and a resolve that showed in her face the way resolve sometimes shows in people who have already lost the thing they most feared losing and found out they survived it. During those 2 weeks, Wade also continued Para's shooting lessons. They went beyond the shooting now. He showed her the ground around her property the way a man shows ground he intends to defend, where cover was, where the sight lines ran, which approaches were exposed, and which gave a defender the advantage. "You're mapping a battlefield," she said one afternoon, watching him study the approach from the north. "I'm mapping a situation," he said. "A battlefield is what someone else decides it becomes." On a morning in mid-November, Elias Pugh rode out to the vital place before sunrise. He was pale and his hands were shaking when he got down from his horse, and Para brought him inside and gave him coffee before he said anything. What he said was, "They killed Milo Reese." Milo Reese was a man Para and Wade both knew by name, though not well. He had a small claim southeast of the Hadley place, had not been directly in Thane's expansion path, and had made the mistake of going to the county clerk's office 2 days ago with a signed affidavit attesting that the Vidal deed was legitimate, and that he had witnessed Rodrigo Vidal's signature on it. He had ridden home from the county seat late in the afternoon. His horse had come back without him. They found Milo Reese in a dry wash at sunrise. The official account would be that he had fallen from his horse. Para sat very still when she heard this. "He was helping us," she said. "Yes," Pugh said. She looked at Wade. He was standing near the window watching the yard. "Now?" she asked. "Soon," he said. "Thane has decided that patience is running out for him. That means he'll push before he's ready and push hard." He turned from the window. "We need to be in position before he does." That night was the night everything changed. Wade had spent part of the afternoon making certain preparations around the property that he did not explain in detail. He had been out to the north fence line and the gap in the dry-wash cottonwoods that was the easiest approach to the yard from the Caldera Springs road. He had been to the south slope and the barn, and the old water trough that sat half-buried near the east fence. When he came back in, he had the look of a man who has finished checking a list he keeps in his head. Para asked him point-blank what he had done. "If they come tonight," he said, "I want them to find more than they expected when they get here. And if they come with enough men that none of that matters, then the men who come with them are going to need to understand that this is not a place that will, taken without cost. People who calculate costs change their minds sometimes." She looked at him across the kitchen table and said the thing she had been working up to for the better part of 2 weeks. "Wade, I need to know who you are." He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down. "My name was Wade Calloway," he said. "People called me the Caldera Ghost for a while, back when it meant something. That was mostly in Texas and into Kansas. Maybe 12 years ago. I was not a kind man then. I was not a careful man. I was very good at one specific thing, and I did it too much. And by the time I figured out that doing it too much was going to get me dead in a ditch somewhere, I'd already done enough of it that I couldn't exactly announce myself in any town east of the Pecos. Para sat very still. "The Caldera ghost?" she said. "Yes. My father mentioned that name once. He said the Caldera ghost was the man who cleared out the Rios outfit down in Doña Ana County. 7 men. Alone." 6, Wade said. The story got bigger with the distance, the way stories do. 6, she said. Alone. That was a long time ago. "Are you the same man?" He looked at his hands, which were the hands of someone who had spent years using them for things he probably did not entirely want to remember. "I try not to be," he said. "But the thing about that kind of skill is that it doesn't disappear because you decide to be someone different. It waits." She said nothing for a long time. Outside, the desert wind moved through the cottonwoods along the wash, and the horses moved in their stalls, and somewhere far out on the mesa a coyote called once and went quiet. "I'm glad it was waiting," she said finally. He looked at her. "So am I," he said, "right now." They came at 2 in the morning, Corbin and Fen Galt, Reyes, and 4 men Wade had not seen before. 7 of them in total, coming in from the north along the road, and splitting when they hit the dry wash, sending 3 men wide to the east to cover the barn and the water approach. Para was in the house. She had the Winchester her father had left her, loaded and ready, and she was positioned at the north window the way Wade had shown her, which gave her a sightline on the yard and some cover from the window frame. She was breathing the way he had taught her to breathe, slow and deliberate, like she was trying to use less of the night air than usual. Wade was not in the house. The first man over the north fence hit a tripwire at knee height that Wade had strung between 2 posts. The wire ran to a cluster of empty tin cans hanging from a nail in the fence post, and the sound they made when they rattled together was louder in the dark quiet of the early morning. Then a gunshot. The man went down. The horses in the barn started moving. Corbin Galt, who was 20 feet behind the man who fell, stopped and listened to the silence that came after the noise. "Calloway." It was Dolan Reyes's voice, carrying across the yard from somewhere near the dry wash. "We know you're in there, Calloway. You come out and nobody gets hurt." No answer from the house. "Miss Vidal?" Reyes called again. "This is your last chance to settle up with Mr. Thane. You got 60 days past the due date on that note. We're here to collect the property." Still, nothing. Reyes made a sound of frustration. "Corbin, take the barn." Corbin moved toward the barn in a low run, the way men move when they expect to be shot at. He made it to the barn door, pulled it open, and went through it. Inside the barn, the stalls were empty. The horses had been moved, and the floor of the barn was covered in 6 inches of loose hay that Wade had piled there that afternoon. Corbin heard a sound above him and looked up. Wade was in the barn loft. What happened next was faster than the telling of it. Corbin brought his gun up, and Wade came off the loft, and the gun went off into the rafters. They went down together into the loose hay. Corbin Galt was a big man and powerful, but Wade had the angle and the leverage and the specific experience of a man who has done this kind of thing in earnest. And Corbin Galt ended up face down in the hay with his gun arm twisted in a way it was not meant to be twisted, and his cheek pressed into the floor. "Stay down," Wade said. "I won't hurt you if you stay down." Corbin stayed down. Outside, the 3 men who had been sent around to the east found the old water trough that Wade half buried near the east fence, and what they found with it was that the ground around it was soft and went away under their boots, in ways the ground is generally not supposed to do. 1 man went in up to his knee. Another caught a foot on the edge of the trough and went sideways. The third, who was the most cautious, stopped 15 feet back and stood still and thought about his choices. Fen Galt, who was supposed to be covering the house approach from the south, found Para instead of finding the house empty. Fen was quick and quiet in the dark, and he came around the south corner of the adobe without making any noise worth mentioning. He was within 15 feet of the south wall when the hammer of Para's rifle clicked back. "Don't," she said. He stopped. She stepped out from behind the old wagon that had been sitting against the south wall since her father's time, and she was holding the Winchester in a way that suggested she had been taught recently and had been paying close attention. Fen Galt looked at her and made a very quick calculation about his options. "Set it down," she said. "On the ground. Slow." He set it down. "Now sit down next to it and put your hands on your knees." He sat down. He put his hands on his knees. He was a man who had been frightened by very few things in his life, and he found the experience deeply unfamiliar. Reyes had heard Corbin's shot from the barn, and the scuffle of sound that followed it, and then nothing. He had heard the commotion from the east approach, and the silence after that, too. He was standing near the north fence with two men, and he was doing the calculation that Dolan Reyes did not like doing, which was a calculation that the situation had changed from what he had expected it to be. Wade came out of the barn and walked across the yard toward the north fence. He came into the light of the half-moon and stood there. "You've got two men down, two controlled, and the east approach is blocked," he said to Reyes. He said it conversationally, without heat. "Your situation is what it is. What you do next is up to you." Reyes looked at the two men beside him. They were looking back at him with the expressions of men who had signed on for a different kind of evening. "You can't hold this property by yourself forever," Reyes said. "I don't need to hold it forever," Wade said. "I need to hold it long enough for the Territorial Marshal's office to get the fraudulent filing documentation and open an investigation into the notary fraud on the Vidal note. That documentation left for Albuquerque 3 days ago. Elias Pugh carried it personally." Reyes was quiet. "The dates on that filing," Wade said, "are going to be very hard for Mr. Thane to explain. And Milo Reese's death is going to become very interesting to a territorial marshal who is already looking at a water rights fraud case." The two men with Reyes exchanged a look that had nothing to do with loyalty to Augustus Thane and everything to do with their own continued freedom. "I'm going," one of them said to Reyes, and walked to his horse. The other one did the same. Reyes stood alone at the fence in the half-moonlight, and he looked at Wade the way a man looks at something he had not correctly estimated, which is the expression of a man who was too proud to acknowledge the estimate was wrong. "This isn't finished," Reyes said. "It will be," Wade said. Reyes rode out. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, a rider arrived at the Vidal place with a letter. It was from the Territorial Marshal's office in Albuquerque, confirming receipt of Elias Pugh's documentation and announcing that Deputy Marshal Garland T. Crane would be arriving in Caldera Springs within the week to open a formal inquiry. Para read the letter twice. Then she looked up at Wade. "Pugh really did go," she said. "He did," Wade said, "the day after Milo Reese died." "You knew he was going?" "I asked him to. The night before he came out here to tell us." She thought about this. "You had the plan already." "Had the beginning of one," he said. "The letter to the marshal was the part that mattered most. Without it, everything else was just two people holding a piece of land against 7 hired men, which is a good way to get killed eventually. And with it, Thane has a different problem. He can take land from a widow who hasn't got money for a lawyer. He cannot make a territorial marshal investigation disappear." The week that followed was tense in the specific way that situations are tense when the outcome is determined but not yet announced. Dolan Reyes did not come back. The Galt brothers were not seen in Caldera Springs. Augustus Thane rode into town on the Friday and went directly to Sheriff Pemrick's office. And the two of them talked for a long time behind a closed door. And when Thane came out, his face had the careful neutrality of a man rearranging his position. Deputy Marshal Crane arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks almost to the day after Milo Reese had been found in the dry wash. He was a careful, methodical man, young for the badge he carried, with the kind of unhurried thoroughness that made people underestimated him until they had been underestimated by him first. He talked to Elias Pugh. He talked to the Castellano brothers and the Moreaus and Cora Hadley. He talked to every person in Caldera Springs who would talk to him. which turned out to be considerably more people than had been willing to make noise previously, because the presence of a territorial marshal has a way of adjusting people's calculations about what is safe to say out loud. He talked to Sheriff Pemrick for 3 hours, and afterward Pemrick walked out of his own office looking somewhat diminished. He talked to Wade last. Crane was smart enough to know there was more to this particular drifter than the trail-worn coat suggested, and he asked straightforward questions and got straightforward answers. And at the end of it, he looked at Wade with the expression of someone adding a column and not being surprised by the total. "The fraudulent filing is clear," Crane said. "The notary dates are going to hang Thane's lawyer, and possibly Thane himself, depending on what we find in the documentation. Milo Reese's death is going to stay officially accidental because there are no witnesses. That's the part I can't fix." "I know," Wade said. "The water rights certification will be suspended pending the fraud investigation. That means Thane's expansion is stopped for the foreseeable future. The existing families keep their land." "That's what matters," Wade said. Crane looked at him. "You're Wade Calloway," he said. It was not a question. Wade said nothing. "I've seen your name in about 6 different territories' files," Crane said. "None of them outstanding at the moment, which is convenient for both of us." "Convenient," Wade agreed. "You're going to ride on when this is settled." "Yes. You want to tell me where?" Wade almost smiled again, the ghost of it. "No," he said. "But I'll probably end up somewhere that needs it. Same as here." Crane looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who has decided that some situations resolve better with a certain amount of professional discretion. "Good riding to you then," he said. The last evening came the way last evenings do, without announcing itself the way things that matter rarely do. Para found out only because she looked out the window and saw Wade's gray horse saddled at the fence. He had not said he was leaving that day. He had not said he was leaving that week. He had just, at some point in the middle of the afternoon, saddled the horse. She came outside and found him at the fence looking west where the mesas were going red in the late light. "Today," she said. "The marshal doesn't need me anymore," he said. "Thane's lawyers are already negotiating the withdrawal of the fraudulent note. Pemrick's been told in no uncertain terms that his job depends on doing his actual job. The Castellano brothers have been keeping Reyes honest, and Reyes is smart enough to know when a situation has run out on him. You could stay anyway," she said. He did not answer right away. He looked at the mesas. "There's a family in the San Juan Basin I heard about through Elias," he said. "Something similar to what happened here. Smaller in scale, but the same shape." She understood this. She did not like it, which was a different thing from not understanding it. "You don't stop," she said. "Not while there's somewhere to go," he said. She looked at the ground and then back at him. "Is that because you think you can fix everything, or because stopping is harder than going?" He thought about this with the honesty she had come to expect from him, which was a kind of honesty she had not entirely believed in men before she met him. "Both," he said. "Probably." She nodded. "The barn roof," she said. "You finished it. Nobody asked you to finish it. It needed finishing. A lot of things need finishing," she said. "That's not a reason." He turned to look at her. In the last light, with the mesas behind her and the wind moving her hair, she was the kind of woman that the country produced sometimes, shaped by the hardship into something the hardship could not quite break, and finer for it. "No," he said. "It isn't. The reason was that I wanted to." She reached out and took his hand and held it for a moment. Just a moment, and then let go. "Come back through sometime," she said. "If your road comes through here, my road tends to come through wherever it goes," he said. "That's not a promise." "No," he agreed, "but I mean it." He swung up onto the gray and rode west toward the mesas in the last of the evening light, and Para watched him go until the dark took him and the sound of the hooves faded into the desert silence. She stood there for a while after he was gone. Then she went inside and put a kettle on and sat down at the table where she and Wade had eaten beans and biscuits, and read the fraudulent filing and planned out things that had turned out to matter. The Bible, with the deed inside it, was on the shelf where it had always been. The land was still hers. The land would still be hers in the morning, and the morning after that. She thought about what Wade had said, that his road went wherever it went, and that he meant what he said about coming back. She believed him the same way she believed in the law, with sincere conviction and a clear-eyed awareness that believing in a thing does not guarantee its arrival. But hoping for it was a thing she could afford. The barn was a solid, good barn. The roof did not leak. She had learned to shoot, and somewhere west of the Red Mesas, riding in a direction that would eventually take him to the next thing that needed it, was a man who had chosen to stay until the staying was done. That, partner, is the story of Caldera Springs in the autumn of 1884. And I want to leave you with something about it before we go. I have told you stories from the old frontier all my life, and I have sat with enough of them to know that the ones that linger are not the ones where the hero rides in and solves everything clean. The real ones are messy and costly and leave something behind when they are over. Milo Reese was dead, and there was no undoing that. The Galt brothers were loose somewhere in the territory, and they would find another man to work for and do it again in some other town. Augustus Thane would likely negotiate his way out of the worst of the fraud charges and find a softer angle to work from. But Para Vidal had her land. Elias Pugh had his hardware store. The Castellano brothers had their cattle. Cora Hadley had her claim. And a notarized date on a fraudulent filing was going to follow Augustus Thane's lawyers into every courtroom they walked into for the next decade. Justice in the Old West was rarely the clean, complete kind that stories make it out to be. It was mostly the partial kind, the kind you got by being stubborn enough and brave enough and willing enough to make the wrongdoing expensive. That is the kind of justice that sticks, partner. The kind that says to the next man who comes along with a false deed and a pocket full of bought judges, "This is going to cost you more than it cost them, and they have already proven they will pay the cost." Wade Calloway understood that. He was not a man who believed in perfect solutions. He believed in making things better than they were, by whatever means were available, and then riding on and doing it again. That is the work. That is always the work. If this story spoke to you tonight, partner, I would be grateful if you would hit that subscribe button right now, and leave me a like if you want more of these, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you listened from tonight. Tell me what time it was. Tell me about a place you know that needed someone like Wade. I read every single comment, every single one. Until our trails cross again, friend, keep your powder dry and your soul honest. This story is a work of fiction inspired by the history and spirit of the American frontier. All characters, names, and events are entirely fictional and created for storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is coincidental. Visual elements are AI-generated, produced with care for the traditions of the Western genre.